Next, I'm very excited to welcome the current Public Service Commissioner, Lawrence Bubba McDonald, and his opponent in the January 5th runoff, candidate Daniel Blackman. Thank you very much for joining us, gentlemen. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thank you for having us.
Absolutely. With us, Commissioner McDonald.
Nah,
there he is.
I
So,
thought you got nervous. You there?
no, I'm not nervous, Daniel. You know better than that.
now, according to the website, and I will admit that I wasn't as familiar with the Georgia Public Service Commission as I should be, but I was very interested to read that the Georgia Public Service Commission has the exclusive power to decide what are fair and reasonable rates for services under its jurisdiction. It's got to balance the needs of the citizens of Georgia for reliable services and reasonable rates with the needs for the utilities to earn a reasonable return on their investments. So in other words, Commission is charged with protecting consumers and their interest while abiding by legal standards and setting rates and also protecting the utilities. So I want to welcome both of you. It's obviously a very important position. Thank you for being here. What I'm gonna do, the format is I'm gonna ask you a series of questions. I'm gonna ask you to kind of think of it as a lightning round because we only have limited time. And I'm gonna ask that you try to limit your answers to each question to 1 minute. We'll also have 1 minute for you each to give a closing statement prior to taking questions from our viewers at the end. So to begin, we'll start with softball. Can you please tell us a little about yourself and why you are running for Georgia Public Service Commission? Commissioner McDonald, let's start with you.
Well, I want to thank the people of Georgia for allowing me to serve them on the Georgia Public Service Commission. We have my experience as a business owner all my adult life. I've met payrolls in good times and bad times. And then I've also had the opportunity to serve as the chairman-elect for the Chatham County Commission. I started out as a county commissioner in Jackson County, Georgia. I served 20 years in the State House of Representatives, and I was appointed to the commission by then Governor Zell Miller to fill an unexpired term on the Public Service Commission. And it's been my pleasure to do that. And I'm seeking re-election for a couple of three reasons. Number one is that the people of Georgia, all the people of Georgia, need this independent conservative voice on the Georgia Public Service Commission. We have a fiduciary responsibility to our vertically integrated utilities. Also, we have the responsibility, Bo, as you said, about protecting the consumers of Georgia. One of the big projects on our platter right now, of course, is finishing these two new nuclear plants. First nuclear plants in the United States in over 37 years. And what they're going to do, Mr. Ellis talked about the job programs and business coming to Chatham County and Savannah area. When a scout comes into your community, you don't know that they're there. He or she is looking at your transportation infrastructure, looking at many things. But one of the three things they're looking at is what is my energy cost and what is the reliability? What is the reliability of it? And because of our diversified generation program in the state, both gas and electricity, we fill that program to the top. And that's what they like.
Thank you, sir. Same question for you, Mr. Blackman. Could you tell us a little about yourself and why you're running for the commission?
Yeah, first and foremost, to all those who are here, I want to first thank you for the opportunity, to the mayor, to the commissioner-elect, to all of you, to Bubba. I think it's important for us to have this conversation and be a part of this process, seeing that we are, quote unquote, the third runoff, and I'm very privileged to be a part of this conversation. My name is Daniel Blackman. I grew up in Columbus, Georgia. Very proud to be the son of a United States Army Ranger. So to the military families watching, I want to thank you for your service. To the working families that are paying attention to this conversation, you are looking at someone who's been on the front line of the fight for working families for a long time. I've been very privileged to work on policy around the United States from an energy policy standpoint. We've worked on climate change. I believe in science. I believe that as patterns change in our weather, as there are challenges in our communities, when crises like COVID-19 hit, I believe that we have to fundamentally put ourselves in a position to not respond, but to be prepared rather than having to respond so many times and too often. I was not only appointed to 2 separate initiatives out of Washington that dealt with the Obama administration's Clean Power Plan, but also in mitigating the climate fight in low and moderate income communities. I was basically invited prior to the Paris Climate prior to the signing of the Paris Climate Accords to witness the global reach that this country has had that we have not had over the past 4 years. And I'm very happy to be a part of a conversation that can expand renewable energy in this state. I'm very proud to use my background on the investment side to drive investment into our communities and to make sure that, as it was stated earlier, we don't just focus our center points on Metro Atlanta. This is a state that consists of 159 counties. We can no longer measure our viability based on Metro Atlanta by leaving Chatham County out, Muskogee County, or any of our coastal counties in Georgia, even those rural areas in North Georgia where I reside. So I'm very much happy to be a part of this conversation, and I'm looking forward to the January 5th election.
Thank you, Mr. Blackman. And for the next question, I'll begin with you. Do you believe the expansion of broadband internet access is important? And if so, why?
Well, you know, it's interesting we get to start off with that question because when Mr. McDonald just spoke, he talked about companies and individuals that come into our counties when we know and when we don't know. And he mentioned energy and viability, but he didn't mention the expansion of broadband. I don't think that there is a company in the United States that wants to go into an area that lacks high-speed internet and wireless broadband, that lacks telecommunications. Too many of our senior citizens rely on telemedicine. What we've seen this year is that our children and our grandchildren, namely those who are around this state in our poor zip codes, our low and moderate income families, their children are at home right now. Some of them would like to watch this feed, but they don't have the internet connectivity to be able to do so. And we need to fundamentally focus on the investments that can be driven by the PSC and the responsibility we have, not just to be able to make these utility companies profitable, but to make sure that all of our counties and our children have a chance to compete. We're not doing that. And when you have utility shutoffs, like in Georgia right now, because our moratorium ended on July 15th, you have children that can't learn because their lights are off. And a person's income should never determine their children's outcome. And I believe right now that if we don't expand wireless broadband, especially with the challenges that we faced, we're going to lose an entire generation of Georgians, regardless of their race or background, but based on their zip code.
Thank you, Mr. Blackman. Same question to you, Commissioner McDonald.
The only thing I can say to that, we're all wanting the expansion of broadband and internet. But Daniel, you're running for the wrong office to do that. You need to be running for Congress or the state legislature, because our charge at the Public Service Commission, we have no governance over the internet nor the broadband, because it is interstate, and that's the FCC that regulates those issues out there, as well as cell telephones. Now, we are in the midst of a legislative mandate on pole attachments for the broadband companies, i.e. whether it's Comcast or AT&T or the telephone associations of Georgia, but it has to be a company that's not affiliated with an EMC, but they are paying to attach to their poles so that those children can be served out there. But as far as us telling Georgia Power that you've got to get an internet business, or AT&T, which is a deregulated telecom company done by Congress years ago, we do have 13 independent telephone companies in the state of Georgia that we rate regulate. We don't rate regulate EMCs in Georgia. So there's a define of what we can do under the governance of the laws. We don't make the laws, but we have to abide by the laws that are being made. And that's where, yes, I support the internet. I support the broadband expansion, but I can only support it in the way that the legislative body gives us the responsibility to do it with.
I'd like an opportunity to rebuttal.
Sure, you can have 20 seconds.
First, I'll take the compliment on running for Congress, but right now I'm focused on running for the Public Service Commission. And what I would say is that in this position, he just mentioned those 13 companies for pole attachment. We don't necessarily have to drive that investment, but Bubba, you and I both know that the Georgia State Legislature is right across the street. Leadership isn't saying what we can't do. That's being a part of the problem. Being a part of the solution is electing people that are willing to go outside of their purview and do their job. We understand that Georgia has not been connected, and you can say all you want that you can't have a say-so or no influence, but you and I both know that companies like AT&T, when this pandemic was announced, worked with Brian Kemp to make sure we expanded wireless hotspots. And even though you may not have a direct responsibility on that, you can work with those 13 companies to encourage them to do the right thing and to drive investments. It may not be on your resume, but you clearly know, with as long as you've been in office, that that's something that you can help drive around this state. And I'm not going to turn my back on anybody in the state of Georgia.
Commissioner McDonald, any response?
Well, neither and I, Daniel, but I did when I took my oath of office. I took the oath of office to work within the framework of the Constitution that is responsible for the job of a public service commissioner. And with that said, there's a lot that we have to do when we don't really have time to go out there and do that other. We go to the General Assembly with issues when they ask about positions, whether it be telecom or what it might be, but we don't, I'm not going to go to the legislature and start telling them what they need to do over there, because they control the budget of the Public Service Commission. And having been over there, you gotta work from them and not to them.
Okay. I'm going to try to squeeze in two quick questions here before we have to move on due to time. So I'll start with you, Commissioner McDonald, on this one. What is your personal philosophy, and what philosophy do you bring to the position in balancing the needs of the citizens with the needs of the utility companies?
Well, go back to 2013, I brought solar power to the state of Georgia. Georgia Power did not have 1 watt of solar energy in the 2013 Integrated Resource Plan. I brought 525 megawatts into that program. Today, Georgia is in the top 10 in solar development in the United States of America. And what it has done, it's being done with no state subsidies and no upward pressure on the ratepayer. It's been a market driven, and that comes from a capitalistic, conservative approach to solar energy. It's the EMCs now of getting very involved in solar development. We have the biomass that's involved with all the timber that we have in Georgia and the roughage that comes off of that. So that's another program in diversification of energy. When you go back to, as Daniel said about the coastal area, we just approved a stranded asset in Savannah where the old generation plant was there on the bay, on the river, to go to the Ports Authority so they can continue to expand the Ports Authority. When I was chairman of the Appropriations Committee in the legislature, I supported different crane operations that went to the ports. And when on the Public Service Commission, I was responsible for getting 3 area codes from then Commissioner Kennard at the FCC, and kept the coast of Savannah and coast of Georgia with the 912 area code, which was being competitive around in the whole southern part of the state. So those are some things that within the framework of what my responsibilities are that I've been able to do outside of Atlanta for the coast of Georgia.
Thank you, Commissioner McDonald. Mr. Blackman, how do you see your role as balancing the needs of the utilities with the needs of the citizens of the state?
The balancing act has been, quite frankly, one-sided. If you ask me, for the last decade, we've seen one side be extremely profitable and the other side bear the brunt of overruns and poor decisions that have been made by my opponent. I mean, I'm not elected at the commission. I have not been at the table for all those decisions that were made, but the citizens of Georgia have been on the menu each and every time. You know, Mr. McDonald just said the work he did with the 525 megawatts of solar. Look, that was a coalition that helped. And while I will give him credit for being a commissioner in place that has done some work to be able to establish that. There were individuals around this state, like the Sierra Club, who I'm endorsed by, groups like the Tea Party Patriots, who are Republican and I'm a Democrat. And you know what we did? We worked with groups to make sure that when Georgia Power, Bubba's Georgia Power, literally went out there and made sure that their 20-year integrated resources plan had not 1 ounce of solar in it. We made sure that coalitions were on the ground to make sure that individuals like the commissioner who had been doing work, but you cannot solely take credit for the work that so many coalitions on the ground did. There were a lot of people that had a chance to be able to fight for that. When you look at the decisions that have been made as a result that have nothing to do with just the solar, we go back to 2009 with Clinton Vogel, and you see that time after time, year after year, my opponent has voted for those overruns to be passed on to ratepayers. And it's not something that I'm sitting here making an accusation about. There are receipts for that. There are votes for that. So I think that we need to have a more balanced approach by doing what's right. Plan Vogel should have been capped a long time ago rather than making sure that Georgia Power gets a blank check each and every time they say there's an overrun. We are currently facing a project that is 5 years behind schedule and $14 billion over budget. I don't see a balance there when ratepayers, consumers, and seniors on a fixed income are continuously paying for the mistakes that have been made and the decisions by people like Mr. McDonald.
Well, in lieu of any rebuttals to that question, I'm going to ask you both to take 1 minute and give us a closing statement on what, if there's anything else you want to cover or any message that you want to give to the voters that may be watching this evening. Let's begin with you, Commissioner McDonald.
Well, Daniel is so wrong about the solar program. So wrong. The Sierra Club, and I've known the Sierra Club, but Sierra Club had nothing to do with the 525 megawatts I put in the integrated resource plan. Number two, I would ask Daniel, if you're elected, are you going to stop the construction of the nuclear plants in Georgia? And who would ever thought Westinghouse would go bankrupt? Who would ever thought that we would have the tsunami with Fukushima when Toshiba was one of the partners with Westinghouse in the development? These things are obstacles that came into play that the commission had nothing to do with. But I can tell you one thing, the sun will be shining for the next 80 years in Georgia, and those solar programs are going to work for the people of Georgia. It's going to give us diversified generation. And the other thing is, when those two nuclear plants come online, they're going to provide cheap, clean, reliable energy for the next 80 to 100 years. That's what's going to happen for the people of Georgia. And that's what I'm looking forward to making happen.
Thank you, Commissioner McDonald. Closing statement, Mr. Blackman.
So one, I'm not going to run away from the question. Bubba and I both know that I do not have the power to stop those constructions. So I'd like to make sure we stay on message and not speak to fears that quite frankly don't exist within people in this state that understand that while we may be having those 80 to 100 years of solar or of the sunlight, we have 60 years that we'll be paying off a nuclear facility right now where each and every year those overruns were passed on. You mentioned Westinghouse, but ever since that time, we didn't learn from those mistakes. We didn't take the recommendations of staff or experts or scientists that were out there. What we did was we continued seeing Westinghouse fail to pass the overruns on to the people. So my question to you would be, why continuously vote to pass the overruns on if we saw failure in South Carolina? It makes absolutely no sense for us to have this approach to say what has worked when we're not going to acknowledge what has not. Georgia Power, with all due respect, employs a lot of people, and they've done a lot of things right in this state. But the bottom line is you have given them a blank check. You have not held them accountable when they should have been accountable. We have taken each and every challenge, whether it's coal ash or it's the cost overruns at Vogel. Each and every time we have had a chance to do the right thing, we have passed those costs onto ratepayers, not shareholders, onto ratepayers. And my closing statement in this conversation would be, you have an individual that has served for a very long time, that has been there for every vote, for every decision, for every challenge, and also for every opportunity. We know his record. We know the decisions he's made, and we see the burden on people around this state right now who are struggling to pay their bills, who are struggling because of the coal ash ponds in this state, who are struggling because of a nuclear plant that, yes, is the only one that's being constructed, but a nuclear plant that we're paying for on our bills. So at the end of the day, this isn't a race about a person's track record as a public service commission candidate as much as it is about the future of this state and how we are going to address the low and moderate income families in this state that can't access solar, that aren't able to lower their utilities and are struggling each and every day because their families don't get the same opportunities that people in Metro Atlanta do. So I'm here to run against Mr. McDonald. The race is on January 5th. My name is Daniel Blackman, and I'll be honored to be your next public service commissioner.
Bo, I tried to stay within the framework of the time that you gave me. I didn't run for 2 minutes. I stayed within the framework. You know, all I want to say is this, to closing up. I've not attacked my opponent like he just attacked me. I'm stating the facts. He's talking about some of those costs for the consumer. They were passed on by the legislature. Public Service Committee do that. The CWIP plan was a legislative act. The environmental cost that goes on your bill, it's passed on from the federal government. It's not by the Georgia Public Service, but we have some of the cheapest rates in electricity in the state of Georgia as there is in the nation, some 16% below the national average. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. I want to thank you both for your service and time tonight.